We're official now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for listening to our banter without too much criticism. We welcome you here today to our Stages of Change webinar. Again, this is Dawn and Ken from Rutgers University on the East Coast. So we're happy to be back with you again. For those of you who came back for a second time, welcome. And we're going to look to you for all your knowledge and help with this. So thank you. Thanks for coming back. As I was saying early on, I think motivational interviewing and associated, stages of change and the techniques that are used in motivational interviewing, it is something that we have to kind of stay in and practice every so often to become competent and to stay competent and feel comfortable. So I'm really glad that some folks have come back, and welcome to those of you who weren't with us before. Thanks, Ken. So just a couple points of housekeeping. Everyone is muted and your cameras are off so that we have a fairly smooth presentation today. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to either raise your hand or type it in the chat box. I will try to continuously monitor the chat box and see if anybody is asking a question. And when you ask a question, you can either type it in the box or you can ask for the mic, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or we can unmute you because we like to hear from you. As I did mention, also, I just want to reiterate that this is being recorded. So just keep that in mind. It records the chat and our audio. And we're recording it so that we can make this available to you after the training. The state of Washington will make it available to you in a link. And at that time, you're free to download it, share it with whoever you'd like. But I wanted to let you know that you will also receive the PowerPoint in a handout format as well in the next week. So today, we're going to be talking specifically about stages of change. So we're going to focus on identifying the reasons for stage-based assessment of change and how that fits in clinically to the work that you do. Describe the unique characteristics of each stage of change. So for some of you, this will be a refresher, and that's awesome. Identify provider strategies for working with service recipients in each stage of change. So you're going to see why it's really important to not mismatch intervention with where the person is. So getting back to meeting the person. This is really stages of change, I feel, is really at the heart of meeting people where they're at and applying the information to some sample vignettes, more real world type situations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Thank you much, Dawn. Welcome or welcome back, as the case may be. Nice to be able to catch up with you all again. Just a couple other pieces before we get rolling. At the end of this, we will have some resources, including a book and also our departmental website, which you may be familiar with because I believe there's a section where all these things get stored. There's also another section that just has videos that we've created. So there is a more detailed version of this on that site. We'll show you the link for that at the end. You can also look me up on YouTube, Ken Kinter, and they're all in there as well. So if you want a refresher on this, or if you want to hear this presented in a little different manner, those materials are there. Because as Dawn said, I think this is very helpful to me. As I've gone on, when I started in the field, I was much more about diagnosis and diagnosing people correctly and all of that. And as I've gone on, about 30 years in the field now, I feel less critical about diagnosis, and I'm more about what is that person ready and willing to change? What are they ready to move on? Because it isn't necessarily the thing I want them to be ready to move on. But if I try to get someone to change the way I want them to change, I'm going to create a lot of resistance. And we'll talk more about that in the motivational interviewing part of this next month. So that's what a lot of today is about. One last piece. Very often, stages of change and motivational interviewing are trained together. We've broken them in those two parts. It really doesn't matter what order it is. We do stages of change this time. We'll do motivational interviewing next time, but it's not a deal breaker that you do it in that order. Some people do motivational interviewing first and then stages of change. And like I said, you have the videos as well to help remind you. So let's start this in sort of a non-clinical way. Think about change in your own life. I'm sure that there are many things that you are, many things in your life that you're thinking about changing, are in the process of changing, or have changed in the past, or you are in a change process that is not yet complete. And you're somewhere in this cycle that we're going to talk about. Change is not pretty. Very often it's kind of a one step forward, two steps back sort of situation. Sometimes it depends on how we define a change to begin with. So I really want you to think about this from a place of change for yourself, even more than, say, your clients. You make it work for you, you'll be able to make it work for your clients. And as Dawn said absolutely correctly before, that we want to be where the client is. If we are out in front of the client, we create resistance. Very often we call the clients resistant. That's a very resistant client, very resistant patient. Well, no, it just means we're out in front. We're out too far in front of that person. We're not going in a direction they want to go. So why would they follow us there? And of course, we're not walking with them anymore. The research tells us that most people are not ready to change at any given point in time. Only about 8 to 12% of people are ready to move. If you think about your own clients, how many of them are ready to change? And you may catch yourself being in this position of feeling like the cheerleader for change. Come on, let's do something different. Let's do something different. And the client's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then you get frustrated. So that becomes the beginning of a rather dysfunctional cycle. And also, anything we don't do right, we will likely do again. If we are trying to sell a person on changing something, we're going to have to keep selling it over and over and over again, like a not very nice used car. We're just going to have to keep selling it. And that's draining on us, and it doesn't help the client, and it doesn't help the therapeutic relationship in which change is very often embedded. So my guess is that some of this is going to be review for you, and I hope you hear something either put in a different way or kind of a nice reminder, as we were saying in the pre-chat here. If we don't use this all the time, it gets rusty. I know it definitely gets rusty for me. So we're going to do a quick cycle through these changes, through the stages of change, starting at pre-contemplation. And then after that, we're going to talk about different interventions for each stage. So you can, part one is to figure out what stage of change a person is in regarding a specific thing, and then match that up with stage appropriate interventions to help move that person forward and to dodge a whole lot of resistance along the way. So this is sort of the batting order that we're going to be going through here. So we're going to start off with pre-contemplation, which very simply put is, I don't have a problem. And very often implied in that is, you have a problem. You're the one with the problem. So pre-contemplation, in some cases, it's framed as pre-awareness of having a problem. And in some cases, it's referred to as anti-contemplation, where I'm not even hearing about having a problem, not an option. So that's the first part of this, is to determine where that person is. Because again, changes that you have made in your own life, and I would ask you to think about one now, there was probably a period of time in your life where you weren't aware that something was a problem. You weren't aware of it. Then there was probably a period of time where you were aware of it, but didn't want to be aware of it. So, for example, whenever I get sick, I spend 2 or 3 days pretending I'm not sick and just saying, this is going to pass and it's going to be okay. And boy, has the last year changed the perspective on that a little bit. But so I spend this time, and then finally, okay, it rises to the point where, okay, I need to acknowledge this and do something about this. Now, very often we refer to pre-contemplation as denial, and that's part of it, but that's not really all of it. Part of this is trying to figure out the why. What's the person's cover story? If they don't feel like they have a problem, what's the story they're running? My guess is, now Dawn and I work in a state psychiatric hospital where people are sent in voluntarily. So many of the people that we work with are in this pre-contemplation stage about having a mental illness. They will look you right in the eye and they say, I do not have a mental illness. And you will answer this with, you have been in this hospital 20 times. And they'll say, yeah, but, and then here's the other story. This is the alternate version of why I'm here. And then that becomes sort of the terrain that we need to operate and change with, because I can't magically make that person gain insight into what's going on with them. So again, we commonly refer to this as denial. but there really is more to it than that. So very often what happens is we start out in this pre-awareness or not wanting to acknowledge that something's going on, and then something happens where we move into contemplation. And contemplation is pretty well captured by, I have a problem, but I don't know what to do about it. I'm guessing that many of you out there, and myself as well, have any number of things that fit in this category. Aren't there things that you're gonna do, gonna fix, gonna change at some point? If you're like me, you have to-do lists, and there's lots of stuff on those to-do lists, and things can get nice and old on those to-do lists. Because the reality is there's a very valid reason why you haven't done that thing yet. It might be not enough time. It might be not enough money. It might be any number of things. It might be something else needs to happen before that change actually gets made. But whatever it is, it's a valid thing. So contemplation, we sort of refer to it as, if you pictured the scales, like the scales of justice, where, okay, you've got something on one side and something on the other. So a person is debating change, but they're not really that sure of it. Very often we refer to this stage actually as the but stage, and that's one T in but, because a person will say, I want to quit smoking, but I have a very stressful job. I want to go back to school, but I don't have the money. So there's any number of those. So you can hear both sides of the argument in this. So that's clearly someone that's in contemplation. They're looking at the reason to change and the reason why not, but the result is sort of inactivity. People can stay in this stage for years. I'm guessing that you and I both have things that are several years old that are sitting in contemplation, and they're just waiting. They're waiting for something, either something internal or something external to move that thing along. And if you've ever written a pro and con list, that's a perfect example of an intervention for someone who is in contemplation, because then you get to list what's on both sides. If I could, I'll give an example. There's a good friend of mine, and he and I have never been thin, and we have never been in great physical condition. And his story, his whole life, was that he didn't need to do anything about his health because his blood pressure and his heart rate and his vitals were good. So as long as his vitals and his blood work were good, he didn't need to worry about his health or become any more physically active, which was a really nice form of pre-contemplation. Well, all of a sudden, a few years back, he went to see his doctor, and his blood sugar was not okay, and his blood pressure was not okay. And now he's getting little blue pieces of paper telling him he needs to start taking medication. And he was having a bit of a crisis at that point. So now he's in this panic. He was ejected from pre-contemplation into contemplation. But now what am I going to do? I don't want to take these medications. I don't want to get sick. What do I need to do to take better care of myself? If I lose weight, do I not take the medication? So this is the quandary of contemplation. So next step is the step that probably doesn't get enough credit. And we as helpers very often are guilty of skipping over this step. Usually what happens with us is we're so gung-ho to get somebody into that change stage. We want them into action. We want them moving, that as soon as they give us a little bit of daylight, we're ready to go. So preparation is captured by, I'm making a plan to help with my problem. Most changes that happen spontaneously don't last long. I'm sure many of us have had the experience where we're very gung-ho. We might start that diet, that cottage cheese and pineapple diet, and we're doing that for a champ for like 3 days. And then after 3 days, we're ready to take a human life for a Snickers bar. I mean, that's just kind of how that works. Changes that don't have planning hit that part where it only lasts as long as your initial motivation lasts. And then the real world comes back in with its stressors and its triggers and all that kind of stuff, with its people, places, and things. And we revert, and then we bail on the change process, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So we skip the planning stage. And sometimes the planning stage helps pump the brakes a little bit, where we could say, well, let's think about this thing that we're doing. This change that you want to make in your life, it isn't really a sprint, it's a marathon. So how do we make lasting change happen? It's not helpful if you lose 30 pounds this year and put them right back on again next year. That's probably not the goal. So how can we make this part of a longer term change? My favorite example of how preparation gets skipped over, I work with a lot of families, and very often those families have a loved one that has an addiction. So of course the families are saying, come on, let's get into treatment. Let's get you detox. Let's get you into rehab. Let's do it. Let's do it. Person says, no, 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 much like the song. But then all of a sudden that person will give you a ray of sunlight and they'll say, you know what, tomorrow I'll go to rehab. So the family makes the arrangements, pack the car, get everything ready. They're all set to go. You already know how this story goes. The next day, the person goes back to saying, no, no, no. And then everybody gets very upset with that person. Again, they go around that loop a few times and then they get frustrated. So we're trying to avoid all of those trips through the loop. So preparation is about making the plan, preferably a written plan that has the supports, the barriers, what's worked, what hasn't, just to think this out. Oh, my favorite example of the preparation, another favorite example of the preparation stage for me is I decided that I was going to get myself into better shape, so I joined a gym. That's the end of the story. I never went back again. But apparently you have to go back. Like they were nagging me about going back and there were other things that needed to happen. I don't know. I found it all very inconvenient. So joining the gym was a preparatory step. It looked like I was taking action, but not so much. And I don't know, there are probably other examples of that too. I almost took action, but not exactly. I did something to set it up, but I didn't really follow through. So then we move into action, and this is game time. This is when the change actually begins. This is if I had actually showed up to the gym, maybe. It's happened other times. So this is like day one. Okay, we're making the change. We're actually doing it. Sometimes these days are pretty easy. We start off with a full head of steam, and then other days they are extremely difficult. It may be very difficult to start because if we haven't made a good plan, we haven't thought about all of the things that kept that behavior around for us. If we're quitting smoking and we haven't thought, well, what happens when all my pals go on break and they all want to go outside and smoke? If I haven't thought that through, it's very easy to get pulled back in again. I don't know how many of you work with people with addictions. Classic example, right? Oh, well, I was just hanging out with my friends and then the relapse happened. Well, the friends are who you use with. That's something that you would try to address when you're planning. And of course, the first stages can be very difficult. You can come up with every single excuse why not to do this thing. I have used excuses to not go to the gym that I'm embarrassed to share here, although one of them is that I was wearing the wrong socks. That's a reason to blow off a workout, right? So, that sort of thing. So the action stage can be very difficult, but there's a place where it's also very energizing. Where you're like, okay, now you're actually doing this thing. If you want to see a great example of action steps without necessarily a lot of planning, go to any gym right after New Year's Day and then go again about a month later. You're going to see a difference. All those people who were gung-ho, New Year's resolution, I'm doing this, doesn't last. They disappear. Just change is difficult. We don't realize all of the things that we're keeping the behavior around. And that's part of the job of the preparation process is to, think about all those things and plan for them. So next up is maintenance. Now here's where I'm going to take issue with the book. The book says that the maintenance stage is I'm working on this and it's getting easier. The book puts that time period at 6 months, where if you've made a change for 6 months, now you're in maintenance stage. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I've spoken to people. I think my favorite example is people who've quit smoking. There are people where the hardest part was years. There are other people where once they got through 3 weeks, it got easier. They had that momentum. They had that routine. So I'm not as much in love with the 6 month time period as I am with it feels easier now. Now I don't feel myself making all the excuses. It sort of has its own momentum, cruise control at this point. In fact, if any of you want to share in the chat, and socks are very important. If any of you want to share in the chat, if you have made a major change in your life, I don't need to know what that major change was, but was there a period of time where it got easier, where you just felt a shift? What time period was that? I'm curious because I'm not sure where the 6 month thing came from, but that's not consistent with my experience. Depends on the thing. So up until now, we've only been talking about movement forward through the change process. So from pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then action. Now, what we've forgotten about is relapse, or what they've been calling recycling. Uh, Relapse, again, doesn't just mean in the substance abuse or addiction sense. It's just a recurrence of whatever that behavior was. And they've been turning it into recycling, using that term a little bit more, maybe to get away from the stigma of relapse. But also, I think the idea of normalizing. Look, if you've had a behavior that you've been doing for years, it may not be realistic for you to say, all right, I'm just gonna, stop doing this thing, and it's not gonna happen the first time out. And again, that's very common advice to give to people if you work with people with severe and persistent mental illness or addictions. It's not realistic to say you're going to beat this thing the first time out. If that was going to happen, it probably would have happened already. So we're looking for a new sort of approach to it. Some of the critical pieces about relapsing and recycling is, first of all, you've got to survive the relapse, right? That's important. But then the other part of it is, what do you learn from it? A relapse can make a recovery stronger if you learn from it. What was the trigger? What set you over the edge? And then it can help make your recovery stronger. We'll talk a little bit more about that, how it works. The other thing that we really want to address in this stage is when people come in after a relapse, they feel ashamed, they feel angry, they feel defeated. There's all of this negative shaming type emotions going on. And we don't want to get too caught up in that. And the last thing we want to do is throw shame on top of that. One of my absolute low points working in a state psychiatric hospital was a person returned to the hospital after swearing to everyone, the treatment team, God, and everyone, that they were never going to come back again. Well, they came back again. And a person on the team, who is now retired, thankfully, said, "We knew you'd be back." I said, first of all, it's not nice to think that. And you would never say that that person is already in a shame place. And the last thing you want to do is dump on that. And that's a very blatant example, but there's also a lot more subtle examples of that too. We don't want to send that piece out. So we'll talk about how we can work with that a little bit more. So some other pieces about this is that stage of change is constantly changing. You could have woken up this morning completely ready to make this change, and it could be over by noon. It just depends on what's going on in your life. People are just constantly in motion. Now, sometimes the motion's forward, and sometimes it's backwards, in the case of relapse. One of the major points of stages of change is that we vary as helpers. We are usually coaching we are what they would call in court leading the witness. We're trying to bring that person into a particular direction, and we're trying too hard, or we're getting that too many steps out in front of that person. The old saying, don't walk in front of me, I may not follow, don't walk behind me, I may not lead, walk beside. Stages of change in motivational interviewing are very much about walking beside someone. And have you ever been walking alongside someone and then all of a sudden you take that step and you realize that you're alone now? I walk my dog every day. The dog finds something interesting and all of a sudden I'm by myself. So that's kind of how that works. And you don't like that feeling with your clients necessarily either. Sometimes going the other way will be helpful. Again, those of you who work with people with addictions, sometimes telling people that you don't think they're capable of doing something or they might not be up for it at this time, sometimes that's a really nice challenge, and sometimes people will rise to that. There's a whole different talk about that. One of the other critical points about stages of change is people are in different stages for different issues. You might hear me slip and say a pre-contemplator or a contemplator, and that's a mistake. It should be a person in preparation or a person in contemplation, because they're in contemplation about a specific thing, and we'll talk about how that works. I'm sure at this point, and we may touch on this a little more later if we have time, you are in every stage of change for something. And if we sat here and hashed it out, we could find it out. There are some things that people around you are telling you that you might want to change about yourself, and you're like, that's not a problem. So you're in a form of pre-contemplation about that. I know for everyone I've ever met is in contemplation about a number of things. And then some things we are planning for, but we haven't done yet. And then, for example, I've been planning vacations for about a year now. Been a rough year for that. And then of course the action stage. We're in an action stage about various things as well. So people are constantly moving and they're in different stages for different issues. Those are two really, really important points. So shifting over to strategies, because I hate these trainings where we talk all about what the problem is and then we don't talk about anything that you can do about it. So the first thing when you're talking to someone in pre-contemplation is listen. And you see on the little tiles here, explore. What's the cover story? What's the story they're running? Because that person that's been in the psychiatric hospital 20 times who doesn't have a mental illness, I could spend the rest of my life arguing with them. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. That's a lot of fun, but it gets old quick. Instead, what's their cover story? The police in my town hate me and they keep bringing me here. Okay. All right. Now, I don't necessarily need to sign off or endorse that and say, okay, well, you obviously have no mental illness. The police hate you. But I got the cover story now. I've got the theme. So that lets me know what the terrain is. And then I could start to say, okay, well, is it just the police department in one town? Or is it police department in multiple towns? Or were there times you came into the police weren't involved at all? So then, after you learn what their cover story is, then you can kind of start working around the edges and see, what parts of this are backed up, and then maybe what parts of this aren't necessarily so grounded in truth. Because really all that you're doing here is you're forming the relationship. You're making yourself a safe person. You're creating that container where where change will ultimately come from. And I can feel it from out in the ether already. This is hard for people because all of us are under time constraints. So we got to get down to it. I worked in the emergency room for 20 years. We got to get right down to it, find out what the thing is, do something about it. We don't have time for a lot of song and dance. But the problem is if we don't do it right the first time, we will be doing it again. And as I've gotten better at this skill set, the time burden becomes less because I spend less time trying to put out solutions and trying to answer problems and trying to convince someone of what they need to do instead of working with them. So big thing about pre-contemplation is get their cover story and kind of file away how you're going to get to that cover story later. You can kind of gently push a little bit and see how they feel about things, and they will give you an answer. Has medication helped with this before? No, medication's never helped me. Okay, got that one. Moving on. So that's an important piece. And the relationship building piece that comes from this lasts for a long time. There's a gentleman at the hospital where Dawn and I work who is, according to him, a member of the English royal family. And he knows a phenomenal amount about the English royal family. So the first time I met him, we spent 45 minutes and he was telling me all about this and that and the other and why they're keeping him imprisoned in this hospital. He had a whole story for it. And when he got done the whole story, I just had one question for him. I said, okay, so you're a member of the English royal family and you're trapped in this state psychiatric hospital in New Jersey. Why do you have a Bronx accent? And of course, he had an answer for that. And that's fine. And we kept moving on. I've known this gentleman now for 14 years and we're still friendly, we're still conversational, we still talk, and we're still working from that place of, how do we address this? Because even with the medications, that's not moving. And that may be very often the case with your clients as well. So next up is the contemplation stage. And here it is about making a decisional balance. So just like we were talking about before, you have stuff on the scales here and stuff on the scales there. And if any of you guys are fans of pro and con lists, I'm a really big fan of that. I've actually made a 2x2 version of a pro and con list, which we can send out to you if you want. We can pass that along so that you can use that to assess, okay, what are the reasons for change? What are the reasons against change? And it isn't necessarily a numeric thing. You might have a whole list of great reasons why you want to change something, and there may be only one reason why not. But that one reason may be superior to all of those other reasons. And that's kind of critical from a helper's perspective. I want to know what the challenges are. If you've ever seen a boxing match or an MMA match, and you always see the two combatants and you see all their specifics, how tall they are, what they weigh, what their record is, their reach, all that kind of stuff. To me, this pro and con list is about this. Here are all the forces on the side of change. Here are all the forces on the side of staying the same. And we know they're at impasse. We know they're at impasse because the change hasn't happened. But which are the things that we can do and impact to move things in one direction or another? Can we address some of those barriers to change? Is there more information available? You know, what are the good, is the person fully knowledgeable about the good parts of change? How change is going to benefit them? Are there other things that they don't know? So that's part of it. Or how many of the reasons against change are self-generated? If someone has tried to quit smoking 20 times, they're carrying around some shame and they're carrying around that failure. And one of the reasons that they're not making this change now is, I don't want to fail again. You see how we talk about change is really interesting. We do a lot of self-defeating talk and change. So for example, if I say, well, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, great. Have I ever lost 30 pounds before? The answer is no. Okay, so that's challenging, right? That's tough. How much easier if I say, well, I want to lose 5 pounds, because if I'm going to lose 30, I got to lose 5 first, right? That's a step along the way. 5, a little more reasonable, a little more capable of doing that. When people quit smoking, so they quit for a week, and then they pick up a cigarette. And what do they say? Okay, I failed. And now I'm back again. And they go right back to smoking like they were before. Instead of, okay, I successfully quit for a week. Now what do I need to do to learn from that relapse? So there's a lot of self-defeating talk that we do amongst ourselves about change. And this is a similar thing that we deal with our clients as well. So it's getting both sides. What can we put on both sides of that scale? And obviously we're leaning toward putting more positive things in the area of change. Preparation. As I mentioned before, we very often in our haste neglect this. So what is the written plan? You know, how can we capture all of the reasons for change, how we're going to change, what all the contingencies are going to be, how are we going to deal with the stress of change? Because change is stressful. How are we going to deal with that anxiety? How are we going to deal with the stresses that come up even as the result of a positive change? So again, but think about the person in recovery from addiction who, okay, well, what are you going to do with your time now? Because you're not going to be able to hang out with your friends that use anymore. So what are you going to put in that time? If you don't put something new and better in that space where that thing was, that old thing is going to crawl back in again, or cross addiction is going to happen. Some other thing's going to crawl in there. So what's the good thing you're going to put in its place? And that's all part of the preparation process. You're not just taking something out. You know, a lot of recovery is about substitution. So the written plan, here's going to be the plan. And this plan is not carved in stone at all. It is guaranteed that it will change down the line, you know, as we go. But it's the blueprint. It's the blueprint that we offer, that we go from for change. So next up is the action stage. First part of the action stage, which is complicated, is you don't have to do it right away. This isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. So don't start until you're ready. Let's make the plan. Let's tell the people that can help, our supports, so that they know and can support us. Let's tell the people who need to know, even the people that we're going to relapse with. If I'm going to be going on a diet, I got to tell some friends, because otherwise I'm going to go back into some of those same behaviors, and that's going to pull me off. So what are all of these things I need to do? Get all this stuff ready, and then and then actually do the thing. One of my favorite questions to ask when someone is getting near the action stage is, one of my favorite questions is, and this is from Emergency, how would this fail? If this were going to fail, how do you think it would fail? Because that person knows. They know better than anybody how this is going to fail. And then we do contingency planning for that. But we assume, because that's the way this has gone before. So maintenance stage, very often, I call this the cleaning the house one room at a time phenomenon. Maybe some of you, your house is not necessarily as nice and as clean as you want it to be, but at the same time, cleaning the whole house might be a real hassle. So what happens when you clean one part of that house? Well, okay, so you can feel good because you got part of it done, but then you automatically look at the other parts of the house and now they look worse by comparison. Like, uh-oh, now this part's okay and now that part looks even worse. So when you make one positive change in your life, it naturally leads into others. Again, working with the people with addictions are horrible in the area of self-care. The addiction being pretty much the opposite of self-care. But then when the person starts to stabilize regarding their addiction, get a little clean time, they start to look at the other areas of their life and go, oh my goodness, will you look at this? We've also seen this with people with severe and persistent mental illness. People who've been in that loop of going in and out of the hospital, in and out of the hospital. Well, what happens when you get some time out of the hospital? Very often people get very depressed, because, okay, this part is out of my life. What's the new thing that I put in? So self-care and introspection is one thing. Going back to the addictions model, the 12th step is help someone else with the same problem. That's one of the ways that you help keep yourself well, but also you're contributing because now you're giving the gift that you've gotten. So it's all about self-care. And then what's the next thing? So, okay, you've worked on this thing in your life. What's the next thing that you can work on that will help improve your life in some way or those around you? All right, so strategies in the relapse stage, because I'm guessing you have all come across people who've coming off a position of relapse. Oh yeah, I see some feedback coming back about the SMART plan. Absolutely. And now if you're going to quiz me, I got to remember what SMART is, but it was specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and time-oriented. That is all a guess. Really good. The more specifics, the better. Relevant. So yeah, the more specific you can make it, the better. My favorite part about having that plan is if things go wrong, you can blame the plan. So we had a gentleman who came into our state hospital 4 times in 1 year, and that's not easy to do. And he came in the first time. He doesn't have a mental illness. He doesn't have an addiction. He doesn't need medication, doesn't need therapy, doesn't need anything. His parents need to stop calling the police on him. So pretty standard, pre-contemplation going on there. So out he goes, and he's back in 3 weeks. Same things happened again. Now he's even angrier because now this is becoming a recurrent thing. Still not taking the meds, still doesn't need therapy, still doesn't need anything. Family needs to stop calling the police on him. Okay, fine. We did, though, make a bit of an inroad with him in that he said before his parents call the police, he always has an argument with his folks, and then they call the police. So we made the deal. Well, okay, so when you feel an argument coming on with your folks, walk out. Just take a walk, cool off, and come back. Because if you can avoid the fight, you can avoid the police, therefore avoid the hospital. So we came back a couple months later, and I said, what happened with our plan? And he said, it was raining out. And I went, what a terrible relapse prevention plan we came up with. It didn't even take weather into consideration. That was really awful. And it was weird because it diffused him. He was angry at his folks, and at some level, he was also sort of ashamed of himself as well. But now we blamed our crappy plan, and I sort of took responsibility for the crappy plan. I was like, that was awful. What were we going to do in wintertime? What were we going to do when there's snow on the ground? You can't just go walking out anytime you want. So then we said, all right, let's improve the plan. So, okay, if you don't want to take a walk or can't do that, then put your headphones on, put some music on, listen to music, don't fight with your parents and all that. Now, the reason we're doing these interventions is because he's not hearing anything else. So we're just trying to win the battles that we can at that level. So he ends up coming in the 4th time, saying a couple interesting things. And it took him a little while to come back, longer to come back this time. He said, still didn't have a mental illness, but he said the medication was helping him with his temper. So he was starting to take the medication. Okay, all right, that's a little, I'm not going to fight with this guy about his diagnosis. If he's taking medication and he says it helps him with his temper, I'm rolling with that. The other thing he said this 4th time is, I don't think I can live at home anymore. And that was a pretty interesting insight for him. Again, it's not him saying, okay, well, I have an addiction, I have bipolar disorder, and I have these things going on. But bit by bit, he was moving in his own direction of change. And if we're there with him, we can help foster that. Okay, well, good. If the medication's helping you with your temper, let's stay with that, or let's work that angle. Oh, and if you can't live with your folks anymore, all right, well, let's make a change to that, plan as well. So very much that plan being a living document, the guide of how things go. Because if you work in the community sector, you might be seeing people coming back over and over again. You might have people cycling through your service. So that plan can go through that and evolve along with that. So in the relapse prevention stage, blame the plan, blame that terrible relapse prevention plan that you made. And again, I have no problem taking primary responsibility for it, saying, "Oh man, we can do better. I can definitely do better than this. Let's come up with some better ideas and make this work," to help pull that person out of the shame spiral. You want to turn the shame into questions. Questions don't necessarily have the negative emotional impact that the judgments and the shame will bring. So where did the plan not help you? Again, you've survived the relapse. Let's tweak the plan. Let's not throw it out and start from scratch all over again and just say, okay, that failed. Like many of us who have been through 20 or 30 diets. Okay, that diet failed. I actually saw an interesting commercial recently where a person said, I thought I was the reason, I thought the diets were the reason all those diets are failing. And it really had something to do with me. I needed to do something different, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I'm going to stop for a second because just so we have time for questions. We look like we're doing okay on time. If you have any questions, you can either unmute yourself or fire away, or put them in the chat, and we'll get to them. And then we'll talk. Then we'll move on into the next part, which is the process, and then other stuff from there.
And there's none in the Q&A. So it looks like we're good.
Cool. All right. So, and we'll have time at the end as well.
We have one, Ken.
Oh, all right.
Laura says she sees stinking thinking in the PowerPoint. Can you talk about that? I know that's our terminology. Maybe others know what it is.
Totally stolen from AA. They should be suing me for that. We mentioned before that recovery, a lot of recovery is about substitution. And it's not only substitution of behaviors, but it's substitution of thought, negative thoughts. We all have a tape running in our head, and it all says things to us. And when we're feeling good, it's positive stuff. I'm a good person. I like to help people, all that stuff. And then we feel good and we do good things. But we may also have a part that maybe isn't so positive. That says, I'll give you my favorite example, and I know Dawn's heard this one before, and that is that I'm a technophobe. So whenever I have to do anything that's technological, my initial response is fear and avoidance. And the reason for that is I have a preconceived notion in my head that I am not good at tech stuff. There's evidence to back that up, by the way. But what it tells me is that whenever a new tech thing comes down, I will fail at it. And I tell myself that. So those are my automatic thoughts. That's my stinking thinking. So then that leads me to feel negatively about myself, insecure about myself, and fearful whenever a new tech thing comes down. So when a new tech thing comes down, I avoid it, often to my detriment. So there's a method for that called catch it, check it, change it. And that's in another video that we have on CBT, which you're welcome to look at as well. Catch it, check it, change it. So I have to catch myself doing that. Here comes this tech thing again. I'm telling myself this tech stuff that I'm bad at again. You know what? I got about a 50-50 batting average at figuring out tech stuff. Half the time I figure it out, and half the time I have to go to somebody else, and that person helps me, and that's fine. That's how it works. So I catch that thought. I check it against reality, my little 50-50 reality. And then what the action that comes from that is, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to figure this out myself. And then if that doesn't work, I'm just going to reach out for help. There's going to be somebody I know who knows more about it. And Dawn is very often that person for me. So that's where that is. And then we solve it from there. So stinking thinking is just that negative thought pattern. I've tried to quit smoking 20 times before. I keep failing. It's not that simple. There's other things going on. There are actually, and this is part of that shift that's very stage of change and MI friendly. There's a valid reason why the thing hasn't happened yet. There's a very valid reason. We might not know what it is, but we know it's valid because of all the reasons that person has to change. They haven't changed yet. That means that other thing is just as strong. That impasse is just as strong. I saw another thing in the QA about working the process faster when they're in imminent danger. That is really difficult. Speed does not help us. And again, I've worked in emergency for a very long time. Most of the people that we were working with were suicidal, homicidal, or psychotic. When someone gets to the point where they are incapable of making decisions, where they're just at that point where symptomatically that's where decisions get made for somebody. But what I found is it's really hard to be directive. You end up fighting people. My thing always is to try to find what that person's motivation is. My motivations aren't going to get it done. The probably the most severe alcoholic I ever worked with. This guy had already all the things that I used to hold over someone's head to get them to change. Oh, well, think about your wife. I already drank my wife away. Okay. How about your kid? She has custody of the kid. Well, how about your job? Oh no, I already drank my way out of my job. So this person had literally lost everything, like pretty much everything, working on health and real close to losing life. And so I'm thinking like, oh my God, I can't find anything to get traction on with this guy. And so I asked him, I said, well, obviously you've been in this situation for a long time. It's very severe. Um, what motivation do you have to stop drinking? Is there any motivation? And turns out he used to be a police officer. And he said, I hate it when I'm that drunk that the police have to come and bring into the emergency room. I know that I'm pulling a cop out of the station or off the street so that they can bring me drunk to the emergency room. And I hate that. So to me, that was okay. That's the thing. That's the thing I have to go after, because that's where the motivation is going to come from. I have to find that thing that motivates them. Smoking and weight loss, there's probably 100 reasons why a person should quit smoking or take better care of themselves. But the only one that matters is the one that matters to them in that moment. That's really it. It's finding that thing. We can't tell them that thing. They have to find that thing. I see another one about moving from homelessness to housing as well. And I see multiple domains there. We have mental illness, you have addiction, and then you also have housing issues. I would say from a stage of change perspective, what I like to do is to assess where someone is regarding readiness in all of the domains, and then move on the thing that they're most ready to move on. So you might find someone who's they might be motivated for housing, but not motivated for addictions treatment, or they might be motivated for addictions treatment, but not for treatment for their mental illness. So my way of diagnosing somebody according to the stage of change, and I'm not crazy about the word diagnosis, but I'll use it here, is to say, okay, how ready are you? Which of these things are you furthest along on the process of change? Is this person, and we'll see this in some of the vignettes that are coming up. I want to move on the thing that person's most motivated to move on. So if they're primarily motivated to move on their addictions treatment, and I'm primarily motivated to move on their housing, I'm going to have to put my thing aside and put the energy into what they're doing. I want to move with the thing that they're furthest along on, because we'll make the most progress there. And as we're moving forward with that thing, hopefully we can address some of those other things as well. So I want to, just in the interest of time, I want to get through the rest of this. So one of the other critical pieces of this, hopefully we'll have time at the end that I'll stay on as well. So the point of this slide is pretty critical. So you see all of the stages here from pre-contemplation straight across to maintenance. And again, it's never linear. We just have them laid out like this. So here we have two arcs of relapse. In this case, both of them are from action. And in one, the person's going back into contemplation, and the other one is preparation. And this is that piece of having the plan. So, okay, I'll stay with the example of smoking. So the person is, they quit smoking for a week, and then they went out with some friends, picked up a cigarette, and then, went off and then smoked the rest of the night. So there's two directions this can go from here. The person can say, well, I tried to quit smoking and I failed. That didn't work, and just go back to life and I'll think of something else. That's this arc back into contemplation. It failed, or I failed, and the change process goes into sort of a stasis. We have the ability to hopefully influence that person by having that written plan to say, okay, so you had a relapse, you smoked with your friends that night. What do we need to do now to keep the change process moving? So what do we need to do to keep that relapse trigger from happening again? You know, do you not go out with those friends? Do you tell the friends that you're not smoking? Do you leave if they start smoking? Whatever that looks like, how do we change the standard operating procedure? Because there's a really big difference between that person moving back to contemplation and moving back into preparation where they're ready to stay with the plan with this new modification. So that's really what that's about. And that's this piece at the bottom of relapse can actually be a good thing if the lesson is learned along the way. I quit eating fast food for about 5 years, and I was starting to fantasize about it and romanticize about eating fast food again. And then I went out and had fast food with a friend of mine, and I got amazingly sick. So in a weird way, the relapse was the best thing that ever happened to me. So the cheat sheet for stages of change. This is a really quick way to do that little diagnostic process that we were talking about. So does the person acknowledge that they have a problem? If the answer is no, they're in pre-contemplation. If they say they have a problem, does that person have a plan for change? If the answer is no, they're in contemplation. If they do have a plan, then we're in preparation. Has the person started to put that plan into action? If so, they're in action. If not, then they're still in the preparation stage. And then we have that 6-month differentiation. I like asking the question, has the change gotten easier for them? Has it gotten easier as time has gone on? So that's kind of a quick way to diagnose where that is. So touching back on some of the questions that happened before. So your clients, I'm sure, have a list of things that they're dealing with change-wise. They may have legal problems. They may have addiction issues. They may have mental illness symptoms. They may have all sorts of things going on. And very often people have a problem list. The problem list, assess that person for each of those problems. What stage are they in for each of those? So if you say, okay, about an addiction, they might say, well, I don't have an addiction. Weed's natural, it's good for you. Okay, fine. That might sound like pre-contemplation. What about you taking antidepressants? And I'm making these up as I go. Well, antidepressants really helped me in the past, but I got out of it. It's something I would definitely consider trying again. Okay, all right, we got another stage there. They're a little further along on that one. What about your housing issue? They might say, you know what, I can't live in a place with people. I'm better off living, on my own. Whether that's in the woods or just on some other location. Okay, not a lot of motivation there. So which thing do we find that has the biggest motivation to it, and then move it forward from there? And that's really how you put the stages of change into action to see where that person is. So let's do a little with the remaining time that we have, because I want to stick to time. I will hang around later if there's any other questions, but I will also, I know I want to stick to time because everybody has their schedule. So here's like the little quiz at the end. So we have Cindy. Cindy's been in rehab numerous times, but reports this is due to being hassled by her parents and the police. She feels that this is my life and she can do what she wants. She states, I can do what I want. And you wish you could do the same thing. That's why you try to get me to stop. So enter in the chat, what stage of change do you think Cindy is in regarding her addiction? And I'm seeing a lot of pre-contemplation up there, and that's a winner. And Cindy's pretty clear cut, right? She's telling you pretty much straight up what the deal is. All right. So now we've got Brian. Now Brian's a little more complicated. Brian presents with multiple issues. He's in treatment for bipolar disorder and has been taking medication for this for 4 months. He also wants to get help for his alcohol abuse, but states that nothing works. He also reports that he smokes pot daily to get to sleep and doesn't see this as a problem. Okay, Brian is complicated. Brian probably also resembles your clients more than Cindy does. Cindy's pretty easy. She's just a very straightforward. So how do we come at Brian? Well, the first thing we have to do is divide all of these things up. He has multiple things going on. So let's start off with bipolar disorder. So he's in treatment for bipolar disorder. He's been taking medication for 4 months. Okay. So actually, while we're thinking about this now, what stage does that sound like for you? What stage does Brian sound like he's at regarding bipolar disorder? Because we'll do this in the chat one at a time. Right, I'm seeing it now. Lots of action coming up. Not quite maintenance yet. The book definition is 6 months, and you already know how I feel about the book definition. A great question, the question that would seal the deal, is to ask Brian, well, how's this medication thing going? And he's like, oh, it's fine. I don't even think about it anymore. It's great. Okay, that might be a little more of an indicator toward action versus maintenance, but you're safe with action here. He wants to get help for his alcohol abuse, but states that nothing works. So where is he on that one? What are you hearing there? And again, we diagnose that by going, does he acknowledge that there's a problem with it? Because if it's no, he's in pre-contemplation. If he knows that it's a problem but doesn't know what to do about it, that sounds more like contemplation. Preparation is he's got a plan. He just hasn't put the plan in action yet. You guys are blowing up the chat here. Yeah, he's in contemplation, because you don't hear like he's stuck on the scale. I want to, well, actually the but is right in there, but nothing works. All right, smokes pot daily to get to sleep and doesn't see this as a problem. Where are we at there? And I'm seeing shades of Cindy again. Pre-contemplation. You guys know pre-contemplation. I'm guessing you've seen a lot of it. Dawn and I get quite a bit of it at the hospital as well. So again, how do we come at Brian? And how we come at Brian is we start with the thing that he's furthest along on. So he's been taking medication for this for 4 months. One of the first things I want to know is where he is regarding taking the medication. I hate it. I wish I could stop it tomorrow. They're making me take it, as opposed to it's been a lifesaver. It's kept me out of the hospital for 4 months. Or even more of a typical answer, you know what, I'm taking it. I don't know if it's working. I don't know what it's doing, but I'm doing it. You know, we tend to get more of those middle of the road answers. We want to start with that because that's the one that he's furthest along on. Next up, we have a choice between contemplation in alcohol abuse or the smoking pot thing, which isn't a problem. How much effort can we put into trying to get him to stop pot? And it's not even a matter of, and this goes back to the issue someone brought up before, it isn't even a matter of dangerousness. Very often we move to the thing that is most dangerous, and it's tempting to do that. But again, if that person isn't going to move forward on that thing, they're not going to move forward on that thing. What are they going to move forward on? And how can we approach them in that way? I'm reading a great book on that now called In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts by Mate. It's about the homeless, mentally ill and addicted population in Vancouver. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, I'm only about halfway through it myself. But he talks about how do you approach people that are in that position and being able to help them move in the direction of change. So that's pretty much it. So you work from that position of maximum motivation to change on down.
Ken, there is one question that we didn't get to.
Mm-hmm.
It was towards the end when you were getting started again, and that's from Sharon. And
Mhm.
she had a question about a client, and this sounds very often about folks that we like, similar to folks we see coming into the hospital. How do you reach a client that has been in and out of mental health facilities for 40 years on pretty much every medication known to man? They're physically now starting to fall apart, falling, hitting, and now dementia is creeping in, refusing all meds along with the other health conditions that they're experiencing. And I know that when I worked in the community, very often we were folks next of kin, and we saw them from about 25 years of life to about 65. Yes. And that's when we were placing them in nursing homes. And it is very, very difficult Um,
100%, 100%. There, I guess that, and I can hear in the question the desire to help, and maybe even, hopefully save that person. When someone is in that position, to me, it's always about what is that person motivated to do? What's the thing that they, and we'll get into this more when we talk about motivational interviewing. You almost want to look at where's the dissonance. Where's the person not okay with what's going on? Bill Miller once said that he's met many people who would not admit that they had a problem with mental illness or with addictions, but they would say that they had a hospital problem. So then, okay, so how do we get to work on getting this hospital problem out of your life? So that became it. This whole piece is about what are they motivated to do? What are they motivated to move forward on, so that you can partner with them on that? We can't necessarily make that person partner with what we want them to partner on, even something that we feel may be necessary to keep them safe. They're just not going to have it, and they're going to fight us on it every step of the way. And that book I was talking about before, I definitely recommend it. It's one of the more depressing books I've ever read, but it's really, really good. And it talks about how hard it is to approach people who will not do for themselves and will fight you if you try to do for them. That's that sort of situation. So how do you connect with them? Where is that place that you can connect with them, no matter how small that is, so that you can just start the ball rolling? Because without that engagement process at the beginning and that relationship forming piece, change doesn't really move forward. That person doesn't trust you enough to invest anything in you regarding change. So I hope that's probably not a thorough answer, but it's it's the best I've got at this point. I know we're running late on time as well, so I wanted to just throw a couple other pieces in. The book here from Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente, Changing for Good. It's the book that most of the stuff I know about stages of change comes from. It's also written sort of like a self-help book, in that you can look at, it takes each stage, and then each stage of change has tasks in it. So this is something you can really use for yourself to sort of self-diagnose. Where are you regarding a specific stage of change? And then what task do you need to do to be able to move forward from there? And it's also something you may be able to use with your clients as well. I'm a huge fan of that. And then at the end here, the sites, we have a whole series of videos. This may be the site that you guys go to access the videos of things we've done with Washington, but we also have about 25 videos that we've done in our own system in New Jersey. And we referenced some of the ones on stage of change, on motivational interviewing. There's big ones there. There's short, brief ones there. There's one on CBT where we talk much more about the stinking thinking, if you're interested in following up on that. So all that material is there. So I did want to honor time in case there are people that have a hard and fast need to split, but I'm going to be staying on because I see there are a few more questions and a few other things going on. Yeah, in the realm of hungry gross, Gabor Mate, M-A-T-E, is his last name. That's what a book that is. It's about 10 years old. And if I mispronounced his name, I apologize.
you want to ask the Hungarian?
I should ask.
Very well. You did very well.
Tell the Hungarian, yeah.
Mate.
I should stick with Dr. Mate and just roll from there. That just
Yeah. You did it very well.
Good. Otherwise, it was great talking to all of you again. Hopefully we'll catch you next month when we do motivational interviewing. And I believe they have our contact information too, I think, so that they can reach out if there's any questions between here and there. And feel free to catch the videos, either this one or some of the ones on the other topics.
I'll type the link in the chat here, guys, because I see a couple people asking for it for the RUTGERS link. So let me try to do that now. And then that way you can just kind of jump to it and you can bookmark it. Joya has a question about the upcoming training. Oh, the link received is for Eastern time. It should be
Oh.
Pacific. So it will start at 9:30 your time. So we'll let them know that it went out wonky so that nobody's confused.
Particularly me. Yeah. We want to keep it the same as this one. I know I messed up one before and made it noon instead of 12:30 our time, 9:30 your time. We want to stick to 9:30 your time.
And yes, motivational interviewing is the second part. We like to start with stages of change so y'all understand or, have that foundation there of each of the stages.
Yeah, Kristen, no 6 in the morning. No.
You will never get that from us.
No.
Because, that would mean we'd have to start training at 9. That's even too early for us.
Yeah, that's pushing it.
No.
We like
Thank
this
you, Elke.
middle of the day stuff.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks much. Have a good one all.